There's a voice inside your head that no one else can hear, but it shapes everything you do. It tells you you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy of love or success. That voice, the inner critic, isn't your intuition or truth. It's the echo of past wounds, shame and fear, masquerading as self-discipline or motivation. But in reality, it drains your energy, fuels anxiety, and sabotages your potential. Most people don't realize they're living in a prison built by their own thoughts. Breaking free from the inner critic isn't about silencing the mind. It's about learning where that voice comes from, why it formed, and how to disarm it with awareness, compassion, and courage. When you shift the way you relate to your thoughts, you stop living under their control. You finally reclaim your inner space and step into the person you were always meant to be, whole, powerful, and free. The inner critic is not born with us. It is shaped, conditioned, and reinforced over time through the environments we grow up in and the experiences we absorb. To understand its power, you have to trace its origin. Most people assume that their negative thoughts are just part of who they are, but in truth, those thoughts are learned. As children, we are sensitive, open, and impressionable. Every word spoken to us, especially by caregivers, teachers, or authority figures, sinks deeply into our psyche. When a child is constantly criticized, ignored, compared, or made to feel inadequate, their developing mind internalizes these patterns of judgment. The brain, in its need to survive and be accepted, adopts these voices as its own in an effort to avoid future rejection. Over time, that borrowed voice becomes a constant background noise, reinforcing the idea that we are not enough. For many people, the inner critic first shows up in moments of failure or vulnerability. You try something new and make a mistake, and the voice rushes in with sharp words. "See, I told you you'd fail." What's dangerous is that it doesn't feel like a voice. You experience it as truth. It feels like reality. But the truth is, it's a distortion. The inner critic isn't your truth. It's a protective mechanism that formed in a painful environment. It believes that by shaming you, it will push you to do better, avoid pain, and be accepted. Ironically, all it does is keep you small. Some people inherit their inner critic directly from their parents. If your mother was extremely self-critical or your father had impossible standards, you may find yourself speaking to yourself in the same harsh tone. Others develop it in school systems that reward perfectionism or punish creative risk-taking. Religion, cultural expectations, trauma, or social rejection can all reinforce this pattern. No one is immune. Even the most seemingly confident people carry a hidden voice of self-doubt inside them. What makes the inner critic especially powerful is that it operates in the shadows. You may not even notice how often it speaks. It hides beneath the surface of your choices, guiding you towards self-sabotage, procrastination, or people-pleasing. You say no to opportunities not because you aren't capable, but because the voice tells you you'll never be ready. You avoid relationships because the voice whispers that you're too broken to be loved. This is why awareness is the first step to liberation. Once you begin to notice the inner critic, you take away its greatest weapon, your unconscious agreement. Most people are so fused with their thoughts that they don't even question them. But when you begin to observe the voice and say, "That's not me, that's just a pattern," you break the trance. This act of mindful witnessing is revolutionary. It creates space between you and your thoughts, and in that space, you rediscover your power. Understanding the origin of your inner critic also allows you to develop compassion, not just for yourself now, but for the version of you that first internalized those beliefs. Maybe it was a scared child, an overwhelmed teen, or a lonely adult doing the best they could to survive. When you realize that the inner critic was never trying to harm you but simply protect you in a misguided way, you stop fighting it with more aggression. Instead, you begin the process of healing it. This healing doesn't happen overnight, but it begins with the willingness to explore. Journal your thoughts, notice the patterns, ask yourself, whose voice is this? When did I first start believing this? What was happening in my life at the time? These questions gently lead you back to the root, and once you find the root, you can begin to reframe the narrative. The truth is, you are not lazy, worthless, unlovable, or a failure. Those are labels someone else gave you, labels you can now reject. Healing the inner critic is not about silencing it completely. It may never disappear fully, but its volume can go down, and your awareness can go up. You can learn to meet the voice with wisdom instead of panic. You can question its assumptions and rewrite its messages. The critic may say, "You're not ready," but you respond, "I'm learning." It may say, "You always mess things up," and you counter, "Every mistake is part of my growth." With time, this dialogue shifts your entire inner world. In truth, the inner critic reveals where your deepest wounds are, and that's why understanding its origin is not just about healing, but about awakening. It points you toward the parts of you that still need love, attention, and transformation. It shows you where you've been living in fear instead of truth, and when you finally face it with clarity and compassion, you unlock a power within you that no longer needs to seek validation from the outside. You become whole because you've made peace with your inner world. Silencing the inner critic is not a battle of willpower, but a process of awareness. Most people try to suppress the voice by ignoring it, distracting themselves, or drowning it in fake positivity. But repression only gives it more power. The real transformation begins when you bring that voice into the light and examine it with conscious awareness. The goal isn't to fight it, but to create space between you and the voice, to realize that it's not who you are. The moment you observe the voice rather than automatically believe it, you disrupt the cycle it's been operating in for years. That's the first shift from identification to observation. This requires presence. Awareness means noticing the subtle ways the voice shows up, the tension in your chest when you try something new, the silent judgment when you look in the mirror, the wave of self-doubt when you speak your truth. These aren't just emotions, they're signals that the inner critic is active, and once you're aware of its presence, you gain a choice. You no longer have to react as if the voice is your truth. You can pause, you can breathe, you can respond from a wiser, more compassionate part of yourself. The practice of mindfulness is essential in this stage. You become the witness of your inner world, not its prisoner. When the critic says you're going to fail, you don't push it away. You say, I see you, I hear you, but I don't have to believe you. This response may feel awkward at first, especially if the voice has been running your thoughts for years. But with repetition, it becomes a powerful form of self-liberation. Each time you choose presence over autopilot, you weaken the critic's control. One way to strengthen this process is to externalize the critic. Give it a name, give it a shape, make it into a character or an image in your mind. This may sound strange, but it creates emotional distance. Instead of thinking I'm a failure, you begin to hear it as that old voice is saying I'm a failure again. You separate your identity from the story, and that space gives you leverage. You can now talk back to the voice, not with hatred, but with awareness. You can say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I choose a different truth now. Another important aspect of silencing the critic is replacing its voice with one that's rooted in truth and love. This doesn't mean lying to yourself or using empty affirmations. It means recognizing your inherent worth regardless of performance. You start to build a new voice inside you, one that speaks from wisdom instead of fear. This voice says you are allowed to grow without shame. You are allowed to be a work in progress and still be worthy of love. The more you speak to yourself this way, the less room the critic has to operate. Silencing the critic doesn't mean it never speaks again. It means it no longer drives your decisions. It may still whisper, but it no longer controls you. You become the parent to your inner world, the one who leads with compassion instead of judgment. That shift in power, when you go from being dominated by the voice to observing and managing it, is what true healing feels like. You stop being your own worst enemy. You become your strongest ally, and that quiet change on the inside begins to transform everything on the outside. The inner critic thrives on unchecked beliefs that were often formed during childhood or traumatic experiences. These beliefs are not random. They are inherited, absorbed and repeated until they become invisible frameworks through which we view ourselves and the world. Beliefs like I'm not good enough, I always mess things up, or no one truly loves me, become so ingrained that they feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are conclusions drawn by a younger, more wounded version of you. To truly silence the inner critic, you must challenge and reprogram these outdated beliefs at their root. This process begins with inquiry. When the inner critic speaks, instead of reacting or suppressing it, you ask, where did this belief come from? You begin to trace the voice back to its origins. Was it a parent who constantly criticized you, a teacher who embarrassed you in front of others, a moment where you failed and no one comforted you? By tracing the voice to its source, you realize that the belief isn't your fault. It's something that was placed inside you by circumstances beyond your control. This insight cracks the illusion that the belief is you. Next comes the process of testing the belief. Ask yourself, is this belief always true? Most of the time you'll find it's not. You might believe you're always lazy, but when you look closely, you'll find many moments where you showed up, acted with courage, or persisted despite fear. The inner critic doesn't care about evidence. It repeats the belief because it's familiar. But your conscious mind can bring logic and compassion to the table. When you start gathering proof against the critic's story, its grip begins to loosen. Then you must ask, what would I rather believe? This is not a question of fantasy or blind positivity. It's a question of reclaiming your right to a belief system that nurtures growth instead of suffocating it. Maybe instead of I'm always a failure, you begin to adopt I'm learning through my experiences. Instead of I'm too much, you begin to believe my emotions are valid. These new beliefs must be practiced like a mental muscle. You repeat them not because they feel natural at first, but because they plant the seed of a healthier inner voice. Visualization and journaling can be powerful tools in this phase. Write out the old belief, then write a counter-belief that empowers you. Close your eyes and imagine your younger self scared, confused, hurt, who first adopted that negative belief. Speak the new truth to them. Let them feel seen and heard. This emotional reconnection allows deep healing to take place. It's not about erasing the past, but rewriting the narrative that came from it. Reprogramming your inner beliefs is not a one-time act. It's a daily commitment. The inner critic may keep offering its script, but each time you respond with a conscious, empowering belief, you weaken its influence. Eventually, the new beliefs start to feel more natural. You begin to move through life not from fear or self-rejection, but from a foundation of worth and self-trust. And when challenges come, instead of collapsing into old patterns, you respond with a deeper, stronger inner stability. That's how real transformation unfolds, by changing the beliefs that shape the voice inside you. The final and most transformative step in breaking free from your inner critic is learning how to respond to yourself with self-compassion instead of judgment. The inner critic thrives in environments of harshness, urgency, and perfectionism. It feeds off of the pressure to always be better, to never make mistakes, to constantly prove your worth. But compassion is like light to the darkness of the critic. It disarms its power not by fighting it but by refusing to play its game. When you learn to offer kindness to yourself, especially in your lowest moments, you begin to rewrite the emotional language of your inner world. Self-compassion doesn't mean ignoring your flaws or avoiding growth. It means embracing the truth that you are worthy even when you fall short, that you are still deserving of love even when you don't meet your own expectations. Most people reserve compassion for others but deny it to themselves, believing that being hard on themselves is the only way to improve. But the science and psychology of healing prove otherwise. Long-term change is far more likely when it comes from encouragement, not shame. When the inner critic rises, instead of reacting with more negativity or trying to silence it, you pause and acknowledge it with awareness. You say, "I hear that voice, but I choose not to believe it." Then you ask, "What would I say to a friend in this same situation?" You begin to offer yourself that same understanding. Maybe you say, "I made a mistake, but that doesn't make me a failure." Or, "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. This moment doesn't define me." These small, quiet affirmations may not feel powerful at first, but they are radical acts of emotional courage. Each time you speak them, you are training your nervous system to experience safety instead of shame. Compassion also looks like making space for your emotions without judgment. When you feel fear, anger, sadness, or self-doubt, the inner critic will often label these emotions as weaknesses. But compassion says, "These emotions are valid. Let me be with them." You might cry, write, walk in silence, or simply sit with your hand over your heart. These acts are not small, they are rewiring how you relate to yourself. They are building a foundation of trust between your conscious self and the parts of you that have long been afraid. Over time, the more you practice responding with compassion, the quieter the inner critic becomes. Not because it disappears entirely, but because it loses credibility. It no longer feels like the voice of truth, it feels like an old wound that no longer defines you. And in its place, a new voice begins to grow. A voice that says you are enough as you are. A voice that encourages you to try again. A voice that believes in your resilience, your goodness, and your potential. Freedom from the inner critic isn't about perfection, it's about relationship. The relationship you build with yourself becomes the ground on which everything else in your life stands. And when that relationship is rooted in compassion, you don't need to fear your inner voice anymore, you begin to trust it. You become your own source of comfort, clarity, and strength. That's not just healing, that's true liberation.